Where did that go? There we go. All right. Now we'll go back here. I wish I would have thought of this sooner.
All right, we're giving people a chance to find us. We got a few viewers out there already, I can see, that are watching.
Good.
Oops. There we go.
All right, I think that's right to go. I can close that. I'm gonna try to close as many programs as I can here so I don't overload the system. We've all had that problem with Zoom, those of us who teach high school, where, you know, too many people on at once and videos lag and all that kind of stuff. So,
Well, why don't we begin? It's a couple minutes after 7.
okay, great.
On behalf of the Friends of the Library, I want to welcome everybody to this presentation of Father Dominic. He's going to talk about Easter brunch tonight. And Nelson, you want to say a few words or directions?
Directions, yeah. Welcome, everyone. We're really happy to have Father Dominic back again to talk about Easter brunch. And directions are, there's a chat on the right-hand side of that, and we'll be monitoring the chat. So if you have any questions, as Father Dominic's talking about Easter brunch, he's going to be looking and I'll be assisting, and we'll go ahead and be answering any questions you have as we go through his program that he's got for us tonight. Big thank you to the Friends of the Library for sponsoring this. Thank you for Neighborhood Reads for being a sponsor of this. Dawn, the owner of Neighborhood Reads, you know, does have the Breadhead Bible in her shop. She says she sold quite a few copies this week, but I think she's got 1 or 2 left if you're interested in purchasing that from her. And we have a copy at the library too. And with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Father Dominic.
Okay, thank you. I should ask Nelson, are the questions being asked through YouTube, or are they being asked through Zoom?
They're being asked at this point through YouTube.
Okay, you'll have to keep a track for me then, okay?
Okay.
Because I don't have a way to do that. So as those questions come up through YouTube, then please interrupt me. If people have a question in the middle of the talk, you should go ahead and let me interrupt me if it has something to do with what's on the screen at that moment, or people want to make a comment at that moment. Then please feel free. I'm used to that. I'm a teacher. We get interrupted all the time with people asking questions. So I'm happy if something's up there and you're wondering. Now, one thing that you will not have to interrupt me on is amounts, temperatures, baking times, things like that. When the program's over with, I'll give you directions on where you can get all of the recipes that I'm going to show you tonight And so all those details, you don't need to take notes or record this. I know you are recording this, which is fine, but you will not need to actually write anything down because those recipes will be available for you online afterwards, okay, with clear instructions and all those kinds of details. So you can just kind of sit back and relax and enjoy things, but do feel free to ask questions as we go along. All right, I'm going to go to share screen. This is, as you know, when I do these programs, it's a narrated PowerPoint. And so that's the format that it takes. And I will be doing a PowerPoint presentation. You will not see me, but you'll see my screen. And then as we go along again, Nelson or Bill can interrupt me as needed. I'm going to go to share screen here. And we'll go to slideshow from the beginning. Okay. And can you gentlemen see that?
Yes.
Okay, great, super. So I want to do something for breads for Easter brunch. Everybody knows hot crust buns are what you make for Good Friday. Actually, in my family tradition, my grandfather loved hot cross buns. My grandma made them all the time. She made them in July. She'd make them for his birthday. So my tradition is I make them for Good Friday, but I usually make them also for, say, the seventh Sunday of Easter. You know, maybe later in the year I'll make something and not cut the cross in it. I'll just tell them it's cinnamon rolls, whatever. But what to do for Easter brunch? Well, there's lots and lots of wonderful traditions. And for those of you who have in pandemic baking, you taught yourself how to make a basic white dough, and you're kind of ready to go to the next level. You're exactly in the right place right now. If you've learned how to make a basic white dough, either by yourself, by hand, or in a stand mixer, or even in a bread machine, you can put it in the bread machine on the dough cycle so that it will do all the mixing for you, and then you can shape it yourself, just as you can do with a stand mixer, and have it do the kneading for you. If you've got problems with carpal tunnel or arthritis, or you just don't have a lot of hand strength, or you don't have a lot of skill in kneading, it does take some ability, then you can use those things. That's perfectly acceptable. As long as you get some well-kneaded, smooth, elastic dough, you'll be able to turn out some really beautiful breads. Now, I'm not going to show you how to make this thing you see on the screen right now with the eggs nestled in. Tons and tons of videos of showing you how to do that online now. You can go to YouTube and find lots of different videos that show you how to make that. And there's the Greek version where all of them are red, and then there's an Italian version where there are individual nests. In fact, in season 2, I think it was, of my TV show, I did them as little individual nests with a braided edge on them. So those are all possibilities. I'm going to show you some different things. One of the things that looks really beautiful on a buffet table is a braided loaf. This right here is a braided challah. You can see from the background that's actually from Hanukkah. So that's a beautiful braided loaf. And you could imagine that would look good on pretty much any holiday table, but Easter certainly. Of course, there's a lot of different ways you can braid. With this one, I think is made with four strands, possibly more. I can't remember what that one is particularly. This one is made with 6 strands and woven together to make a crown braid, like you would serve for Purim or for Rosh Hashanah in the Jewish tradition. So there's an example of another different kind of braid that you could do. I'm not going to demonstrate those for you. I'm going to demonstrate something, or actually show you pictures for what's called a slab braid. And as far as I know, I invented this. I've never seen it in another book. I've never seen anybody else do it. So I think for whatever reason, I don't know how I dreamed it into being or got the idea for it. But if you can flatten dough out into a rough oval shape, you can make a braid. The hardest thing about making braided loaves, of course, if you've tried it, or making pretzels, for example, is try to roll out a rope that is perfectly smooth and even the entire distance of the roll. So you get a perfectly even, round, smooth snake, as it were. That can require a lot of finesse and a lot of practice, and not everybody is good at it. And maybe your countertop is a little too smooth, or you don't know how much flour to put down. That can be frustrating. Here's another method that looks just as beautiful, but is remarkably simple. And that is simply to roll a slab out, which is a little bit close to somewhere between a quarter and a half inch thick. What you're seeing right there is about a pound and a quarter of dough, but it could be pretty much any amount. I've made them larger or smaller. And you roll it out simply into a rough oval. You can practically pat it out with your hands. But I will give you a little bit of hint here that sometimes people get frustrated when they're making dough. If you've ever had the experience, we were talking just a little bit ago before the program about making pizza. If you've ever had the experience of trying to roll dough out and you roll, and it stretches out beautiful, and then it comes back together again. Okay, that's that elastic quality of the dough, which is a function of the protein molecules in the dough itself. You can avoid that frustration simply by letting the dough rest for about 10 minutes, and then it will roll out much more simply. Those protein strands start to relax a little bit. So you've let the dough rise once, you've punched the dough down and kneaded out the large air bubbles, and now you're ready to shape it. Well, those gluten strands made of protein kind of tense up together. If you let them relax about 10 minutes, then it will roll out much more easily. That's true for cinnamon rolls, that's true for pizza, and that's true for these braids. Get yourself a rolling pin of any kind and roll it out on a well-floured board and make yourself an oval. And then you take an ordinary pizza cutter, even a cheap one with a small edge on it, and cut 2 parallel lines. But notice that I try to make as even as possible in terms of the width of the cuts, but then also that they are attached at the top. You don't cut all the way through at the top. You leave them connected at the top. And then you simply begin braiding. And as you can see, this is something that pretty much anybody can do. Now, I will point out to you, notice that as each strand comes towards the center in the braid, so just like when you're braiding hair, you bring one in, you bring one in, you bring one into the center. As you're doing that, if you notice on this braid, the same side of the flattened dough remains upward. You don't flip it over as you braid. You keep the same side upward. There's 2 things that happens there. You get a smoother braid, and you also have less possibility of stretching the dough out and making it misshapen and lopsided. So you keep the same side. So you kind of support it with your hands as you pick it up and pull it towards the center, not pulling too hard. And then when you get to the end, you simply tuck the ends under so you get a smooth bottom like you see on the right-hand side. And look, that's a beautiful braid. I mean, that looks just like one that you rolled into rolls. And it really does look quite beautiful. Here's some that I made with that same slab braid technique. Look, they're perfectly even, easily done by an average baker being able to roll out the dough. And if your dough doesn't come out as a perfectly even oval, yeah, go ahead and take the pizza cutter and cut the sides perfectly smooth. Sure, why not? Now the dough that you see in front of you right now, which was baked at 350, about 15 to 20 minutes, probably about 20 minutes for that size. Well, that's a little less than a pound and a quarter, probably about a pound a piece on those. I think maybe it was a convection oven too, so it was a little faster. But you'll notice that it's kind of shiny. That's because after they came out of the oven, I waited about 10 minutes and then I brushed them with melted butter. And that's how you got that shiny surface, but which with a deep, rich color. But also, you look at the previous one, see that's kind of more brown. This with the butter on top of it gives it a little bit of a sheen to it and also makes the dough very, very soft. So when you cut into it, you don't have a crusty top, but you have a really soft top. And that's kind of nice for certain kinds of meals. And I think maybe a brunch would be one of them. So you can see that this produces really beautiful results without a whole lot of complex technique. You can make your slab braid a little fatter. Now that's 2 pounds of dough because that's a 9x5 pan. And you need 2 pounds of dough to be able to fill it up. So I made it a little bit fatter, a little bit wider, not so tall, braided it up and put it inside the pan and let it rise its second time. Remember, there's always 2 rises. There's the first rise for proofing, punch it down, shape your braid, either put it in the pan or on a cookie sheet, and then you let it rise a second time. And then you get a braided loaf that you can slice into sandwiches, but which has a pretty braided top to it. And so again, it's more decorative. Of course, that would be even more beautiful if it had, say, sesame seed or poppy seed on it. You could do this with a whole wheat dough. You can do this with a raisin bread dough. You can do this with herb breads. You can do it with rye. Whatever dough you have, you can use this slab braid technique and really make something quite beautiful and that looks impressive, obviously, on a buffet table. So this is really one of my favorite techniques, and I use it all the time. Whenever I do a lot of braided loaves in a row, I'm almost certainly going to do slab braids. Sometimes when I want to do a more complex braid with 5, 6, 8 strands, then obviously you do that kind of cutting technique. But in this case, it goes lickety split and makes you look like a real pastry chef. So is there anybody who has questions? I'm going to stop there since I've been going nonstop. Do we have any questions in the comments right now?
Question,
Yeah.
does the flour that you use matter, or what kind of flour do you recommend?
This is made with ordinary all-purpose flour. If you had bread flour, you could use that. I've made this as a multigrain before. It looks beautiful as honey oatmeal. When you do a honey oatmeal braid like this, and then put the oatmeal on the top of it in this kind of braided loaf pan, that looks really pretty on a buffet table as well. So yeah, pretty much any yeast dough can be made into one of these slab braids, either a free form on a cookie sheet or in one of these loaf pans, and you'll get great results. I mean, it's a very simple technique, but it sure makes you look like a professional. And I've had people doing it for the first time who've never made anything like this before and turn out beautiful breads that could go on the cover of a magazine, So I think people are capable of this. It only takes a little bit of practice to get it right. So other questions there that you can see?
That's it for the moment.
Okay, great. So let's move to the next recipe, and that is a ham and cheese lattice braid. Now, once again, this can be done with any dough, whether it's a multigrain or a whole wheat or a rye. This is lovely as rye, by the way. This is just, again, plain. This is a slightly enriched white dough that you're seeing in front of you. It has some eggs. I used milk instead of the water so that it would have a more tender crumb, be a little bit softer, okay? This, again, might look kind of complex, but it's actually relatively simple. So you start with, again, about 1.25 pounds, 1.5 pounds of dough. I've done it with as much as 2 pounds. The instructions will give you the actual dimensions that you roll it out to. But if you look very carefully on the left-hand side, you can see that the outer edges, the wings as it were, are rolled slightly thinner than the center. The center is almost twice as thick. That's because, so I used the rolling pin the long way up the length of the dough, started about 1/3 of the way out and rolled it outwards so that you get a thicker center section, thinner on the outer edge. That's because we're going to fold those outer edges over and double them up. And so you don't want a really thick top and a thinner bottom. So the center section is rolled a little bit thinner. Then you can see on the right-hand side, I've got a really nice antique pastry cutter there, vintage anyway. I think I probably got it at a garage sale for $2, Salvation Army, something like that. But you cut these slices, and they're about 1 inch or 1.5 inches wide. You can make them smaller or larger, not too much larger than this, but I've seen people do them only, like 3/8 of an inch wide to make a really complex braid. Not really necessary. This to me seems like a really nice thickness, about 1.5 inches, okay? But as you can see, on a slight diagonal, starting with the thick section and working outward, but leaving the center section uncut. Then in the center, I've got a cup and a half of chopped ham, and I used ordinary deli ham because we get that by, the 2-pound package. But you could use ham off the bone if you had leftover ham from some other meal, if you had something in the freezer, or shaved ham, deli ham, whatever. You could certainly use that. And then a sharp cheddar cheese, about a cup and a half of each. So you've got 3 cups of filling material. Now that looks like it's piled up pretty high, and it is, but that's because it does shrink and deflate a little bit as it bakes. I did press it together so it kind of stayed in place. And then you take a small amount of water, and when I say small amount, just barely wetting a pastry brush, and brush it on the outer edges on those little wing strips, so that as you pull them over, they stick to each other. Kind of acts a little bit like glue. So as you can see, I'm pulling them over left, right, one over each, okay, until I cover up that whole center section of the filling. Now you don't want to pull too hard or stretch it, because then it will become distorted and some will be thinner and some thicker. You want to be careful. You not pull too hard. But as you can see, little by little, it's like making it into a little mummy there. It kind of mummifies itself until you get the thing on the right that again is allowed to rise. Now, because the ham and the cheese are cold, most likely, when you put them on the dough, and then you pull the dough over the top of it, this rises for much longer. Normally, you let the dough rise once for an hour, you punch it down, you shape it like this, and then you might let it rise for half an hour and it's ready to go in the oven. Because this filling is a little cold, most likely, then it will take longer to rise before you can put it in the oven, sometimes 45 minutes or even an hour, depending upon also the temperature of your room. So just to be aware, it may not quite be ready to go in the oven at 30 minutes. It may take a little bit longer because the filling itself is cold, and that slows down the rising process. And when you're done, that's what you get, okay? You get a beautiful top. Now, I have made this before, where just before it goes in the oven, I brush the top with beaten egg. So you beat a whole egg with a little bit of cold water, and then brush it all over the top. And then you'll get that shiny golden brown appearance. On this one, I simply chose to leave it as is because I knew this was going to go in the freezer. And I thought it would be better without the topping to go into the freezer. This one I was saving for later. But I will say, when it came out of the freezer, and then I wrapped it in aluminum foil, I defrosted it, wrapped it in aluminum foil, and put it back in the oven at 300 degrees to warm back up again. This is a smaller version. You can see that one's much larger. There's a smaller one, about a pound worth of dough. But when I pulled it out of the freezer, let it defrost for a full hour on the countertop, unwrapped. Then I wrapped it in aluminum foil, put it in the oven at 300 degrees to warm up, and then you still get a beautiful melted cheese center on it. So this is one of those things that you can make a few days before, or even the day before. You can just put it in the fridge, or if you make 2 of them and put one in the freezer for later, it is possible to put it in the freezer, and then when it comes out, you simply let it thaw on the countertop or in the refrigerator for a longer time, and then wrap it in aluminum foil and pop it back in the oven, 300 degrees, and let it warm up. It will take a long time to warm. I don't say 350 because you don't want to bake it again. You do want it to warm up, but 250 to 300 is a nice warming temperature, but it may take a full half hour to get it to be fully warm and the cheese be all melty, okay? It's of course better when it's made fresh, but I wanted you to know that it is possible to make this ahead. Because Easter being, can be a busy holiday like Christmas is. This filling does not have to be ham. It could be salami or other Italian meats. It could also be a sweet filling. You could do this exact same thing with apple pie filling or strawberry rhubarb. You could do this as a sweet a sweet dessert and put a little icing over the top rather than a savory one. But I kind of like it for a brunch to make something that's kind of like a ham and cheese breakfast bread. Okay. Anybody with questions about the ham and cheese lattice braid, making it, storing it, serving it, any of those kinds of questions?
Can you freeze it before it's baked?
I never do that. I never do that. I know there's people who do, but I find that it doesn't save you any time because you freeze it and then it's got to come out and then it's got to come to room temperature again. And then it's got to rise and then it's got to go in the oven. You may as well just make it all the way and freeze it as a finished product. And you'll get just as good a results, I think anyway. Okay. There are lots of recipes out there for frozen dough, but I find they're more of a hassle. I would just soon finish the project, let it cool completely, wrap it once in plastic and a second time in aluminum foil so it doesn't get freezer burn, throw that whole thing in the freezer, and then let it thaw unwrapped on the counter before you warm it up again. And I get better results that way. Whatever you do, don't use the microwave. They are evil. With regard to bread, it's really difficult to microwave bread and really get a decent result. You're better off using the oven for that sort of thing. By the way, best way to reheat pizza. Maybe I should ask you this, sir, since you have been making pizza in your family more. Nelson, best way to reheat pizza?
What's that? The best way to reheat
What's
a
the best way
pizza?
to reheat pizza? Do you know? What's the very best way to reheat pizza?
We always do it in the oven, but I don't know if that's the right way.
Absolutely best way to do it is in a cast iron skillet.
Oh,
Oh, it'll rock your world because it will re-crisp the bottom and then you flip it over to melt the cheese again for about 2 minutes, flip it back over and you've got crisp all over and it's like a fresh thing of pizza. It is so good.
the cast iron skillet's how we've been making our Chicago deep dish pizzas using kind of your long sit that you recommend.
The long slow rise. I'm just letting you know, guys, just in case you're wondering. Yeah, I do have a pizza program too. We can talk about that later.
Yeah. I got a question from Jenny now for you.
Okay.
She says, how can you tell when it's ready to go in the oven? Does the dough double like in other recipes?
Like in other recipes, the dough will not quite double in this particular case. Because you've wrapped it and stretched it, it will not quite double. And you can be kind of fooled by that. But it will almost double. Okay, yeah, but it is like other recipes. You'll notice that it is significantly larger. Depending upon how much you've kneaded the dough, it may spread rather than rise upward. If your dough is a little softer and you haven't kneaded it as much, it doesn't have as much body to it, it may spread rather than rise. That's okay. You'll still get a good product, but just to be aware that may be something that can happen to you. Okay, that's an excellent question. Anybody else?
That's it for the moment, looks like again.
Excellent. All right, let me move this out of our way, or my way anyway. I don't think you're seeing it. Okay, so this last thing is the real treasure, in my opinion, and there's a whole story that goes with it. Okay, in Slovenian tradition, or Czechoslovakian tradition, Austrian tradition, all that kind of Eastern European, there's a nut roll that is made called potica, P-O-T-I-C-A. And it's usually made with ground walnuts, honey, cream, sometimes beaten egg whites, sugar. There's all these cinnamon, lots of different things. But the filling in it is like a paste. The dough is rolled out excruciatingly thin, like a strudel is, and then you put this layered, very thin layer of paste-like filling that's sweet and cinnamon, and you roll it up into little tiny rolls, and you bake it, and it usually in a bundt pan, and it's this wonderful sweet dessert. I did not grow up eating that. I grew up eating the Austrian version, which is called Paviliza, and it is savory rather than sweet. So the interior of the Paviliza that I grew up with has 2 pounds of bacon. that you chop up and fry, or fry and chop up, actually, more likely. I just bake it in the oven, and you make it fairly crisp, not all the way. And then a whole pound of chopped walnuts, not ground walnuts, but chopped walnuts. And then 6 whole beaten eggs, use 7 if they're not extra large. You beat those eggs up, and then there's a couple tablespoons of sugar. My mother always wanted a little bit of sweetness in hers. Now, let me tell you the Easter story that goes with this. The tradition was to serve this once the the Lenten fasts were over. So when you no longer had to avoid meat and eggs and rich foods and so forth, that's when you ate Paviliza. It was an Easter bread. However, in the old days, before the Second Vatican Council, the Lenten fasts ended on Holy Saturday morning. Okay, so on the morning of Holy Saturday, you could start eating meat again in the old dispensation. That is no longer the case now, but that was the case then. My grandmother would make Paviliza on Good Friday. Now, those of you who know about the Catholic Church and its traditions, Good Friday is the high holy fast day of the church, where you are not eating any meat and you get one meal a day and you are hungry the rest of the day. And my grandmother on Good Friday would fry bacon and then bake bread with it. It was just criminal. We would get out of the house and we would visit every single Stations of the Cross and reading of the Passion and Tenebrae, whatever services there were, we went all over and prayed our way from church to church, so we would not be in the house while she was torturing us with these wonderful smells. And I have done this occasionally with my own monks, where I have baked something really nice on Good Friday that I'm going to serve Saturday after the vigil. Father Ronald teases me about it sometimes, but this is a wonderful bread, so delicious. And I mean, it's like an Egg McMuffin on steroids. It's absolutely spectacular. So you roll the dough out quite large, and your instructions will tell you exactly how wide that is. It's essentially the same amount of dough as would make 2 whole loaves of bread. You will find this recipe in the Breadhead Bible. You'll also find it in season 1 of my cookbook from the TV show. That's 20 years old now. If you have that, it also occurs there. I think it's this first or third cookbook. But you roll the dough out quite large, as you can see, and you spread the chopped bacon all over it, and then now notice the chopped walnuts. They're not ground. They're chopped fairly fine. They're not chopped like for fudge. They're chopped finer than that. But they're not ground extra fine, because you want to have a little bit of crunch, a little bit of texture in the bread itself. Okay. Now, my mother always did this on the dining room table. We didn't have a counter big enough for it in the kitchen, so she did it on the dining room table on a pastry cloth. She had a thick linen pastry cloth that she laid out, and she never used it for anything except for making Paviliza. And when she passed away 3 years ago, we were going through the family linens, and I came across this cloth that had these stains on it. And I thought, why would Mom keep this with the good tablecloth? It's right next to the Irish linen. Why would she do that? And I realized it was because she kept it in the drawer of the dining room where she needed it when she would make Paviliza. So I have big countertops. I sent it to my brother, so that because he bakes it as well, so that he could make it using my mom's special cloth. Now, once you've got it rolled out this way and you've got all the goodies spread over the top, then you take the 6 beaten eggs and simply pour it evenly all over the bacon and walnuts. And it just simply soaks in, okay? It is actual raw beaten egg. It's not cooked. It's raw beaten egg poured over the top of that. And it just kind of soaks into the bacon and the walnuts. And then you sprinkle a couple of tablespoons of sugar on the top. Now, the original recipe from my great-grandma Zunig was used just a tablespoon. My mom always liked 2 because she had kind of a sweet tooth. So I kind of leave that up to you. But then the dough is rolled up like a jelly roll. Okay, and you have to kind of do this slowly so you get all the bacon, evenly distributed and it doesn't kind of bunch up in the middle. And then you shape it as you see here in this kind of double spiral. Now that's a 9x13 pan. If you're lucky enough to have a straight edged lasagna pan that's slightly larger, you might like that a little better. That's what my mother always had, and I happen to have hers. And if your pan, by the way, if your 9x13 pan is kind of thin metal, if you can put it inside another one or put it on top of a cookie sheet, you'll be less likely to have the bottom of the Paviliza burn, because as this rises, this has not risen yet. Okay, this is as it's rolled out. It rose once, I rolled it out, I rolled up the Paviliza with all of its filling, and then I put it in the pan. This has not doubled in size. This is its original size. And it's almost inevitable that some of the egg is going to leak out the ends. You tuck those ends in as best you can and kind of pinch them closed, but you almost always have a little bit of egg leak out. That can burn on the bottom of the pan. So as it leaks out, you simply take a pastry brush and brush it over the top of the dough. So I don't brush it ahead of time. I just let a little bit of the egg leak out as it rises, get that out of the corners of the pan, and brush it over the top of the dough before it goes in the oven, okay? And as you can see, we've got this beautiful, shiny, golden top. And notice the corners here, a little bit of burn there, a little bit of burn there. See, that's where the eggs kind of came out a little bit. But you can see it's big, it's gorgeous. You see it's kind of wrinkled. That's because as it cooled, it shrank a little bit. That's normal. It's okay. It's still going to look beautiful on your buffet. And when you slice it, look at all those beautiful layers and the bacon and the little walnuts. You can see the walnuts are big enough that they're going to give you a little bit of crunch. It's sweet, it's crunchy, it's savory, it's salty all at once. I find it absolutely delicious when it's just served slightly warm with a light hand of butter and a tiny drizzle of honey, and you get that extra little sweet lift to it. It's wonderful. It's a great way to break your fast. If you have to want to take something with you that will give you lots of energy and has plenty of nutrition in it, this is a very rich thing that you can eat. When my mother was in her last illness at home, she was living at home at the time, and we were kind of taking it turn and turn about to take care of her. And each of us would bake something or bring her potato soup or whatever food she liked. She loved mashed potatoes. She could eat those all day long. But she didn't have a whole lot of appetite. But by golly, when I brought her Paviliza, she ate 2 whole slices in a day, which was a lot for her at that time. She wasn't eating a whole lot, but this was such a great favorite of hers. She was delighted. So once you get a taste for it, you might find it becomes a real favorite. But as you can see, it's really quite beautiful. Look at the lovely open grain there, the little holes. It's soft. Okay, I let it rise so it's soft, but even holes, the bacon, the walnuts. This is wonderful. Now, when you cut it, you want to make sure that you have a very sharp knife. And you're really better off finding a knife with a wavy edge rather than a pointed one. If you've ever looked that up, look up wavy bread knife on the internet and you'll find what I'm talking about. The old-fashioned ones made by the Kloss Knife Company of Fremont, Ohio from the 1920s, 30s, 40s, those are outstanding. And if you can get yourself one of those take an edge like none other, and they cut bread beautifully and will not make a lot of crumbs on a crusty Italian loaf or for a French baguette. They instead will slice very beautifully through that. So the best knife you can possibly use to cut one of these up, because you don't want to tear it. It's got these layers and so forth. You don't want it to become unrolled as you're cutting it. Use a sawing motion back and forth. Don't push down hard, but use the sawing motion back and forth. Let that be the cutting. I put out some kind of bread. What was it I put out the other day? I can't remember what it was. Some bread I put out the other day, and I couldn't believe, I don't know who cut it. Like I went to go take my diabetic meds, and I came and they had cut this loaf of bread it looked like it had been kicked apart with a pointed shoe. I mean, it was just in shambles. And I wanted to yell, we have silence at breakfast. I wanted to yell, who cut this bread? But you want to make sure you have a good sharp knife. And if not, it's a worthy investment to get one if you're starting making beautiful breads like this at home. Right? Anybody with a question about this recipe, or anybody who makes this in the sweet version, I'd love to hear about it. Please feel free to offer your own story or suggestion. We'd like to know what's going on in your house for Easter.
I assume those are English walnuts and not black walnuts.
That is correct. English walnuts are really the way to go. Black walnuts are good in certain breads. I have a sourdough bread with black walnuts and sunflower seeds. It's just delicious. But yeah, English walnuts are really the way to go here.
Does the quality of your bacon matter? There's different kinds of bacon out there.
I have a preference for the thin cut rather than the thick cut. A lot of people are really into thick cut bacon these days. I don't find that as good in this particular application. You definitely, if you have a preference for like a sweet maple bacon or apple smoked, those work beautifully as well. That's just another layer of flavor. But if all you have is ordinary Hormel or Hy-Vee or Schnucks, it's going to work just fine. The main thing is to try to cook it until it's crisp, but not too dark, because it does soften up in the baking process because it absorbs the eggs. As you can see, you don't see the eggs, but the richness is there and the flavor is there and the moistness is there, but you don't see like little bits of egg. That's in part because the bacon kind of soaks that up. So you want to make sure that your bacon is relatively crisp.
Right. So oven bacon would be cooking in the oven. I find
that's how I always do bacon anymore, is I just do everything in the oven. But then again, I'm feeding a whole crowd of bachelors. We got to make, a pound and a half of bacon every time we serve it, and so like 24 slices is like a breakfast, so you have no idea how many poached eggs we go through on a Sunday. But yeah, I definitely prefer to do it in the oven. You have a little more control over it anyway that way. Okay. Anybody else? All right, we're going to go to one more recipe here. So you may have been thinking to yourself, all right, well, all this yeasted bread is really great, Father Dominic, but what if I'm not a yeast baker, or I'm a little bit scared of rolling out dough? All right, well, we're going to show you one more thing that you can serve for any holiday. Or my cousin makes these biscuit twists, and he will make them whenever there's like a scout meeting, whenever there's a potluck in the church, whenever there's, the band has a little banquet and you're supposed to bring a dessert or something like that. He will make these biscuit twists. They take like 24 minutes, total. It takes nothing to, and they don't require a really difficult technique. They're really quite simple.
Before we get too farther along here on this one, we have a comment here on whether the library will have samples if they drive by to get to the library. I don't know if you.
Well, it seems to me likely that since I'm becoming a regular at your library there, that at some point I may have to do some kind of live appearance. I don't know what kind of, I don't know if you have any kind of kitchen facilities there or not. I have done programs at libraries before, and I usually have to bring half a kitchen and a toaster oven with me.
We don't have a kitchen. We have a sink.
A lot of libraries were not built for that kind of thing. So it does put a damper on being able to give out samples, but we'll see if we can work something out. I have done a lovely program before on breads that are inspired by literature. We do 4 different breads, and every time I do that, we actually make the samples in a toaster oven. We actually test them and let people eat them. So we may be able to work that out once we're able to travel a little bit more freely.
Oh, that sounds wonderful.
So these biscuit twists, by the way, these biscuit twists can be made in an ordinary toaster oven. Those toaster ovens they use to reheat pizzas in a tavern. I'm talking about those really cheap frozen pizzas you can buy at a bar. Okay. And they like as long as you buy the pizzas from the distributor, they'll give you the oven for free. That's how cheap the oven is. you can make these in that kind of oven. Now that's how simple these are. This is an ordinary biscuit dough, okay, which means you're going to cut your butter into the flour and then add your liquid, which is going to be milk mixed with a little bit of egg. There might be some sugar involved as well, and some baking powder. I prefer baking powder than baking soda. But if you have a buttermilk biscuit recipe that you like, you could certainly use that. You'll get a recipe to go with this. And as you can see, I kind of rolled it out with a rolling pin, but you can see my fingerprints on the outer edges. I mostly just patted this flat with my hands. So I have the rolling pin there to the right, but some parts were a little thicker or thinner, and so I just kind of patted them out with my fingers until I had this rough rectangle, and the actual dimensions will be in the recipe that you will find online. Then, next, excuse me, on the bottom half of this, and the perspective kind of throws you off. It's a little bit keystone, but the bottom half of this is basically sugar mixed with orange zest, nothing else. Okay, so you simply zest an orange and mix it in with the amount of sugar, whatever the recipe calls for. I can't remember how much it is, to be honest. It might only be a half a cup. And then you put it on the bottom half of your rolled out biscuit dough. Then you flip it over so you get a little kind of sandwich sort of thing. Once again, getting out your trusty pizza cutter and cut strips. You can also use a knife if you've got a good sharp one, okay? And then each of the, and notice, and I think this is really important. Notice I did not bother to square everything off perfectly, all right? If you want to go all Martha Stewart on me, you go right ahead, but I am just not living in that world. And I'm living with a bunch of bachelors that these are not going to stay on the plate long enough to make a positive ID, and they're not going to pay any attention to the shape. If you want to make them beautiful and perfect for, a wedding brunch, great. Or you're doing a baby shower brunch, great. Yeah, really square them off and cut it smooth and all like that. But if you're just kind of throwing them out there on your usual, Girl Scout pack meeting or something, yeah, you really don't have to worry about it quite so much. So you cut these strips, and then each of those strips is twisted 3 or 4 times, and it's a little messy. A little bit of the sugar comes out. So notice I have put it on parchment paper, not on the bare pan. If you do put it on the bare pan, it's better if you put a little spray down. If you have a Silpat or silicone mat of some kind on which to bake these, that's not a bad idea either. That's how I usually make them, as a matter of fact. Now, you can also make them so they're perfectly straight up and down. These, I just wanted to show you. They don't have to be fancy, okay? You can make them a little rougher, and they're still going to be just fine. Now, I make these for Christmas a lot, and I notice these are really perfect. I made these for Christmas for the cookbook, so that, yeah, these are really nice. These, as you can see, I love the orange chocolate flavor together. These got a little bit of dark chocolate drizzle over the top of it to go with the orange flavor at Christmas time. At Easter, I think they're really good with an almond drizzle. So you make a powdered sugar drizzle with just powdered sugar and half, and a pinch of salt and a little bit of almond extract, about a half teaspoon of almond extract. You whisk that together and make it fairly thick. I don't have any exact amounts because I just do it by eye. And then you put it in the microwave for about 10 or 15 seconds. And that's going to actually cook the frosting. What's going to happen is that powdered sugar has a little bit of raw sugar flavor to it, obviously. But some powdered sugars also have a little bit of cornstarch in them in order to keep them free flowing. And you can taste that. And maybe you've tasted that before and not known what it was. But a really good icing, you heat it up, and the microwave is a great place to do that. In this case, the microwave is very helpful. Heat it up in the microwave, stir it up, and then cool it until it's at the exact drizzling temperature you want. It's going to flow exactly as much as you want. And that might be a light glaze to brush over the top, or it might be a thicker drizzle that holds its shape like this chocolate does. That's entirely up to you, but that little 10, 15 seconds in the microwave, it'll boil up, it'll bubble. Make sure you use a Pyrex mug. And you can use that to drizzle over the top. And that's why that's so pretty and perfect, is because I waited until it cooled down to the exact temperature I wanted to get it to come out in that beautiful fashion. You can do this, of course, with cinnamon as a cinnamon sugar as the interior, or you can use lemon zest. I imagine you could use grapefruit zest too if you wanted something really unusual, or lime. But those kind of citrus flavors are a nice thing to put in the middle of these biscuit twists. And again, they're terrific on any buffet, and they take no time. You can make them the morning of easily and go ahead and serve them warm and fresh and crisp, and they're outstanding. And just leave them out on the counter because they'll disappear by the end of the day. Like, you'll nibble on them all day long. Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was gonna say, would like lemon curd, would that be too strong for the middle of that?
Lemon curd is gonna drip out and possibly burn.
Okay.
So I don't think I would go there. Lemon curd I would use for other applications, but I don't think I would use it for this. I've not tried it with lemon curd, but that's just my immediate thought, is that it will probably, as it gets hot, it will get more fluid, more liquid, and I think it'll just leak out. And I suspect you find yourself frustrated by that. You may find all of your lemon curd on the pan and none of it inside. So lemon curd is a lovely thing to use when you're making puff pastry treats. That I love lemon curd, where you just take a little square of puff pastry, tuck it into a mini muffin tin, and then put a little dollop of lemon curd in it, and then bake that up and put a little tiny dollop of chantilly cream or something on top of that. Lovely, lovely, lovely little dessert mouthful, little boucher, as it were.
For Christmas this year, I got an Ebelskiver pan, and my daughter loves lemon curd in the Ebelskiver pan.
Lemon curd in the middle of an Ebelskiver. That's a great idea. Wow. That's lovely. For those of you who don't know, Ebelskiver pan makes these little round, bite-sized things. They're kind of like pancake batter, but it basically makes a little round bite, almost like a donut hole, but you can put a variety of different fillings in them. Apple is the traditional one. I have an Ebelskiver pan, and I've had one for probably 15, 20 years. I've never used it. I got it like at a secondhand shop. I thought, oh, I've got to get one of these. I'm the bread monk. I should know how to make these. Nah, never got around to it.
I think it's better for a smaller group. If you have a larger group, you're going to spend a lot of time flipping those tiny Ebelskivers.
Have you ever seen the videos of people doing them in kind of in large batches? I mean, because they do have them on the streets, where people do them in large batches on the streets. So I've seen some videos on that. I think that's fascinating. So, all right. So if you go to the Bread Monk website, and that's breadmonk.com. Okay, I'll show you that screen in just a moment. If you go to the Bread Monk website, and as you can see, I've got an arrow pointing to the navigation bar where it says recipes. If you click on recipes, you will find all 4 of these recipes under the titles that I gave them. So Slab Braid and Paviliza and ham and cheese lattice braid and orange biscuit twists. You'll find them in that list of recipes, and you can find them there and print them out. And there are pictures and very specific details about the size of doughs and how much it weighs and so forth, how long it bakes. And you'll find that to be especially helpful. So, and lots of other recipes there, obviously, as well. If you're interested in more of these kinds of events and programs, as you can see, there's a button there for events and programs. I have a list of all the different library programs I'm doing between now and April. Right now, I have them scheduled all the way into December in a variety of different places. So if you wanted to kind of surf your way across the libraries of the Midwest, you might want to give that a try. There are some videos to watch on the basics of bread making. I do have by the way, a YouTube channel where I have a lot of videos on bread making. And then you can click there on Father Dom's books to find out more about what books I have that are available. As you can see, www.breadmonk.com, there's my address there. I'm in Peru, Illinois. which is about 100 miles south and mostly west of Chicago, where I-39 meets I-80. Ask Father Dom at breadmonk.com is my email address if you have questions or if you want to contact me. I do have a Facebook page under Father Dominic the Bread Monk and a Pinterest page as well if you want to follow recipes that I post there. So there's a different variety. I'm a 21st century monk. I don't tweet and I don't TikTok. I don't do the TikTok thing because it seems like something teenagers do and I feel silly. You know, I'm a boomer. Although I know boomers who use it. It's just one thing too many for this boy. But these are other ways in which I do try to keep in touch with people. Facebook, especially, a lot of people are using to contact me, and that's a very positive thing. Okay. So I'm going to stop share. That's the end of the PowerPoint. We'll see if there are any other questions or comments that people have. She had a great job as a nurse, but she did not have, we did not have a lot of disposable income for vacations and fancy, trips and whatever else. You got to go to Six Flags when you were in 8th grade. That was pretty much it. So we went to the public library literally every Saturday. I mean, walking to the public library, it was safe in those days. And 5 of us would walk all the way to the public library every Saturday morning. It was about 10 blocks, and drop our books off and get new ones and walk back. And that's how I grew up. I grew up with just this insatiable knowledge and interested in 1,000 things. And every time when we wanted to learn something new, my mom would say, well, let's go to the library. And we would go to the library right then, or a big trip, we got to go to the big public library in downtown Peoria and not the McClure branch by our house, or we'd go to the Peoria Heights where you could take out albums. Yeah, vinyl in those days. So this was a big deal for me. And so I'm a big proponent of libraries, and I'm a great believer that we should be making use of them and support them every way we can. So yeah, check out the cookbooks in your library. It's a great resource. There's plenty there. Questions, anybody? You are muted, Nelson.
I'm unmuted now. Yeah, there's actually just a comment, which is thank you so much. What a wonderful presentation.
Oh, well, good. Well, thank you. I appreciate it. I love doing these. I love being able to do something with teaching. Normally I'm doing bread demos, 2 or 3 of them every month, traveling all over and going to parishes and giving talks in museums and stuff like that. And that's been obviously completely eliminated for the last year. So the opportunity to be able to speak with people through library programs, I think is great. It's like one of the best parts of my day. And when you teach high school students, some days are harder than others, as you can imagine. And the joke I always make about teenagers is that education is one of the few areas in which the customer wants less for their money. Like the less they have to do and the less they learn, they actually seem to be happier. It's one of the great ironies of education. Whereas in this kind of situation, obviously, we want to do as much as we can. So it feels a little more encouraging.
Well, thank you very, very much. This was delightful, and I know I learned some things.
Good.
I might try some of them.
I hope people will try the slab braid and the biscuit twists, because those are really the basic things that are easiest to do. And that, even if you're no good at mixing dough, use the stand mixer, use the bread machine, do this little shaping technique and have your family go, you made this? They'll be completely amazed. Be totally worth it.
Well, I hope we can have you again sometime. We'll be in touch, okay?
All right, good. I'd be happy to join you. So if people have additional questions or you want to contact me through Facebook or that email, please feel free to do so. I'd be happy to continue the conversation.
Thank you.
Okay, God bless.
Very good. Thank you.
We'll see everybody. Thank you.
Good night.